She was the woman who would later strike fear into the hearts of all of Europe. But now, it was the most humiliating moment of her life.
She has the most beautiful breasts in the world. They're like Freya's breasts. The breasts of a goddess. Let me show you.
Her husband, in order to shame her, actually intended to strip off her clothes in front of everyone. Lagertha, unable to endure it any longer, picked up the dagger on the table and stabbed it into Sigvard's eye. After calming down, Lagertha finally realized she was in grave danger, because all those sitting in the hall were her husband's men. But unexpectedly, his nephew Einar directly beheaded Sigvard with a swift stroke of his blade. It seemed Sigvard's usual conduct had already incited public outrage. After killing Sigvard, Lagertha took his place and became the new Earl of this land. Not long ago, Lagertha had helped her ex-husband Ragnar reclaim his home. Then she left her son Bjorn with Ragnar, but when Lagertha returned to her current husband's side, she was subjected to Sigvard's wanton insults. Sigvard first criticized Lagertha for not bringing back his stepson, which made him lose a lot of face. Then he suspected Lagertha still had feelings for her ex-husband, saying the reason she went to help Ragnar was because Lagertha still deeply loved him. Although Lagertha was very angry, she still held back her tears and didn't lash out. After some mockery, Sigvard says that he won't go back to bed at night, but in fact he wants to teach Lagertha a lesson. At night, the sound of footsteps outside caught Lagertha's attention. She immediately got up, blew out the candle, and prepared to fight. The group launching the night raid was none other than Sigvard's men. Sigvard knew he couldn't beat Lagertha, so he ordered his men to gang up on her. Although Lagertha was a formidable fighter, there were simply too many opponents. In the end, Lagertha was beaten unconscious. The next day, seeing Lagertha's face covered in bruises, Sigvard's face was full of smug smiles. He thought Lagertha had already submitted, so he became even more unscrupulous. He wanted to strip Lagertha's clothes off in public to humiliate her. Lagertha, as the most famous shield maiden among the Vikings, how could she endure such a great shame? And so, the opening scene happened. After replacing Sigvard and becoming the new Earl, Lagertha officially began her legendary life. On the other side, after reclaiming his territory, Ragnar wanted to execute Earl Borg, but was stopped by King Horik, because right now, they were short on men and ships. If they killed Borg, who else could join forces with them to raid England? Ragnar temporarily agreed with Horik's opinion and indicated that he wouldn't kill Borg until they found a new ally. In the evening, Horik secretly visited Borg in the dungeon. After chatting for a while, Borg began to sow discord. He said Ragnar wouldn't be content to just be a minor earl. He would definitely replace Horik and become king in the end. After all, Ragnar's prestige had already surpassed Horik's.
Let us say, I believe you. What would you have me do?
I would arrange for my escape, and then I would kill Ragnar Lothbrok and make his brother Earl. That's what I would do if I were you.
In fact, Horik had long had this concern. He had also long had the idea of getting rid of Ragnar, but for now, he was still counting on Ragnar to raid with him, so he had always been hesitant. A few days later, while Ragnar was playing with a bow and arrow, a messenger found him and said an Earl Ingstad was willing to ally with him to go west together. Hearing this news, Ragnar was overjoyed, even though he had never even heard of this Earl's name before. As agreed, Ragnar came to a small grove. An old man stood right in front. Ragnar rode over. Just then, Earl Ingstad walked out from behind a tree.
Earl Ingstad. You bear a strong resemblance to my ex-wife.
If I'd given you my true name, you might have turned me away.
Ragnar never imagined that after not seeing Lagertha for a month, she had actually become an earl. Lagertha asked Ragnar. She had over 100 warriors and 4 warships, not far off from their numbers. Was this strength enough to become his ally?
I have been betrayed by earls before. So if you are really Earl Ingstad, then it's a no. But if you're still the Lagertha I remember, then it is a yes.
To prepare for the upcoming westward expedition, Lagertha was actively training her soldiers. A slog watched Lagertha from the stands. She told Ragnar she also wanted to become a warrior like Lagertha. In fact, A slog's strength was not to be underestimated either. It's just that ever since she met Ragnar, she had been constantly pregnant. Now, her belly had risen once again. Now that they had allies, Borg no longer had any value, and the cruelest retaliatory punishment of the medieval Norse, the Blood Eagle ceremony, would ultimately fall upon him. The Blood Eagle ceremony was a torture 1,000 times more cruel than Ling Chi. Before the execution, Ragnar ordered Bjorn to feed Borg some food mixed with herbs. This way, they could ensure Borg wouldn't die too quickly during the execution process. At nightfall, Borg was brought to the square. The setup here was more like some kind of sacrificial ritual to the gods, and Ragnar, as the executioner, had been waiting at the altar for a long time. Knowing he couldn't escape death, Borg no longer wanted to struggle in vain. He nonchalantly took off his clothes and quietly awaited the arrival of death. The execution officially began. Ragnar placed Borg's arms on the racks on either side. Then Ragnar picked up a sharp blade and cut open the flesh on Borg's back to expose his entire ribcage. Blood flowed all over the altar, but from beginning to end, Borg endured the excruciating pain and didn't cry out. You might wonder what kind of strong will would allow him to endure the agony without making a sound. What many people don't understand is that the Vikings believed in the gods led by Odin. In their belief, as long as the tortured person endured and didn't cry out during the entire process, then all his sins would be forgiven by the gods. After death, they could enter Valhalla and drink and be merry with the gods. Ragnar picked up an axe and chopped at Borg's ribs. Then Ragnar used brute force to pry Borg's ribs outward, the blood-red ribs, along with the outline of an eagle drawn on Borg's back in advance, formed a blood eagle in the Vikings' eyes. In this oppressive atmosphere, Borg's wife Torvi was so frightened she fainted. The others didn't dare to directly look at such a terrifying, bloody scene. You thought the punishment would end here? Of course not. A static blood eagle simply couldn't satisfy the Vikings' perverted taste. After completing the static blood eagle, Ragnar dug out Borg's lungs and draped them over his shoulders. The lungs, still weakly breathing, made the ribs tremble up and down. The blood eagle, constantly spreading its wings, was complete. The Vikings' dedication to their beliefs is admirable. Even under such hellish torture, Borg never cried out until his death. Just then, a raven flew in front of Borg. Staring at him, Borg finally showed a look of relief. In his view, the raven must be Odin's messenger, and so, Earl Borg became that blood eagle, his soul entering Valhalla. Perhaps it was the gods punishing Ragnar. A month later, his wife Aslog gave birth to a deformed child. This son had congenitally underdeveloped legs and would never be able to walk. It was obviously very difficult for such a child to grow up. Even if he was lucky enough to survive, it would be hard to live in the harsh conditions of the 9th century. Ragnar was extremely conflicted about whether to keep or abandon the child. He really didn't know how to choose. King Horik found Lagertha by the sea. He asked Lagertha if she was ready for the westward expedition. Lagertha told him she still needed to return to her own territory to prepare ships and men. This would probably take half a month. Just then, the maidservant Porin ran over to deliver the good news that Aslog had given Bjorn another little brother. Bjorn was very happy, but Lagertha's focus wasn't on this. She noticed that this maidservant and her son had an unusual relationship.
I meant, who are you to my son?
She is your servant. And I'm in love with her.
Lagertha couldn't suppress her inner joy, thinking this kid had finally grown up. At this time, Ragnar was still worried about his 5th son. If it was natural selection, then letting this poor child leave this cruel world early was obviously the best. But the child was, after all, a piece of flesh fallen from Aslog's body. She insisted on raising him no matter what. At night, while Aslog was sleeping, Ragnar quietly took his youngest son to the riverside. He picked up the axe several times, wanting to end the child's suffering, but ultimately couldn't do it. In the end, Ragnar put the child by the river and left alone. Before long, Aslog discovered the child was missing and immediately went to find him. Bringing the child back, Ragnar finally agreed with Aslog's idea. Since this was the will of the gods, let's give him a name.
His name is Ivar.
Ivar means boneless. That's right. This infant was none other than the later renowned Ivar the Boneless. Lagertha, while bathing, didn't notice the pair of leering eyes secretly watching her through the crack in the door, but as a female warrior who had long been on the battlefield, Lagertha quickly sensed something was amiss. She just smiled slightly and graciously let the man enter the room.
What'd you want to say?
This person was none other than Einar, who had beheaded Sigurd not long ago. Einar believed that since he had helped kill Sigurd and helped Lagertha become Earl, with these deeds, he should have Lagertha. Even if they didn't marry, Lagertha should at least let him have a taste of her sweetness. Lagertha rejected him on the spot. She said she had never promised anything to anyone. Einar instantly became enraged with humiliation and picked up a dagger to threaten Lagertha.
And then, what would your family do? You couldn't kill me. The only person you could kill was a dying man.
Upon hearing this, Einar had no choice but to reluctantly put down the dagger, and Lagertha also showed her magnanimity. She didn't expose this matter, preserving Einar's last shred of dignity. Lagertha's purpose in returning to her territory this time was to tell her people that she would be going west with Ragnar. This also received the response and support of everyone. With ships and men prepared, the three-party alliance set off, formally heading west. The westbound force this time was the largest so far, with a full 17 warships and over 300 warriors. In that era of sparsely populated lands and low productivity, such a large army was not something that one of England's small feudal kingdoms could resist. But how could England just sit and wait for death? Egbert found El, King of Northumbria. The two prepared to join hands to fight against the Vikings together, but there was currently a thorniest problem before them. Between the two countries, there was the Kingdom of Mercia. Obviously, the forces of their two countries couldn't cross other countries to unite. Moreover, the Kingdom of Mercia was currently in turmoil. Several factions were vying for power. With no absolute leader, Egbert suggested, why not have our two families join forces to divide up the Kingdom of Mercia? This way, all problems would be easily solved. But El was a bit unwilling. With Egbert's strong army, what if he swallowed up the Kingdom of Mercia and then swallowed him? Egbert was also very frank. He understood El's concerns in this regard, but if their two families became one, then El wouldn't need to be afraid, right?
I am proposing the formal marriage of my oldest son and heir, Aethelwulf, to your beautiful daughter, Judith. Now then, what do you say?
Now I say, let us drink to our alliance.
One couldn't help but admire the speed of action on both sides. The next day, Princess Judith and Prince Aethelwulf held their wedding in the church. Next, Egbert began to implement his annexation plan. He summoned Princess Quenthrith of the Kingdom of Mercia. The reason the Kingdom of Mercia was in turmoil was because this Princess Quenthrith had killed her brother who should have inherited the throne. Without a legitimate heir, several factions began to covet the throne. Quenthrith was also one of these factions, and the reason she accepted the invitation to come was naturally in hopes that Egbert could help her ascend to the throne. In the evening, Egbert held a banquet for Quenthrith. Quenthrith got straight to the point. She said the reason she killed her brother was because he had raped her when she was 12 years old. She also knew Egbert's purpose in inviting her.
You want to influence the destiny of Mercia. My family are killing one another, and you want to be on the side of the party which succeeds to the crown.
It's just that Quenthrith didn't know that what Egbert wanted was definitely not as simple as taking sides. Egbert said he was considering sending his son Aethelwulf to Mercia to lend her a helping hand. Quenthrith seduced Aethelwulf. She completely disregarded that Aethelwulf's wife was right beside them. Then she asked if the Vikings were very open in that aspect. By night, she directly slipped into Egbert's room, but Egbert was truly powerless in that regard. Left with no choice, Egbert had to call a few helpers, while he slipped away.
Don't be shy.
On the Vikings' side, after half a month of rushing over the sea, Ragnar's army finally reached Egbert's territory and set up camp on the riverbank. Ragnar's goal was very ambitious. He wanted to negotiate with Egbert to have him cede some land to him, so he could be Egbert's neighbor here. After all, robbery wasn't a long-term solution. Only self-reliance could lead to development and growth. But Horik's vision wasn't that far-reaching. He just wanted to defeat Egbert, then grab the gold and silver treasures and run. Seeing the messenger Ragnar sent out had already gone far, Horik was very angry. As a three-party alliance, why didn't Ragnar discuss with them before making a decision? Lagertha also stood on Horik's side. Before long, Aethelwulf arrived at Ragnar's camp. He said his king father had agreed to have a good talk with Ragnar. Aethelwulf took out Athelstan's arm ring and gave it to Ragnar, knowing Athelstan was still alive. Ragnar was overjoyed. This time, Ragnar didn't directly agree to negotiate. He glanced at his two allies and said they would go meet Egbert together tomorrow. But on the way back, Aethelwulf encountered an ambush. Sneak attacks weren't Ragnar's style, so who were these people? That's right, these people were meticulously arranged by Horik behind Ragnar's back. They annihilated all the people Ethelwulf brought, leaving only Ethelwulf to stagger away, and Horik's purpose in doing this was to enrage Egbert. Horik knew Ragnar didn't want a direct confrontation. Now that they had killed the people Egbert sent to negotiate, the two sides would inevitably fight, and so, the largest war to date officially erupted.